Are you ready to learn the essential tips to max your impact and success? Most would agree that impact and success go hand in hand when nurturing a thriving career or business venture. The challenge is figuring out where to go and who to turn to when you make the move to senior leadership. If this is where you find yourself, we've got just the expert for you. Inga Hebdon is an executive coach and business development strategist. Her mission is to elevate people's impact and success. Inga, welcome to the Subscription Maker podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here, Zachary. I'm really thrilled to have this conversation with you.
Okay, let's start with the tough stuff first.
All right.
What does impact mean to you?
That's a really good question. So I think there are three ways for me, or three ways I'm looking at what is impact. And one way is the reflection on myself in terms of leading myself. How do I show up? How do I communicate well? So that's one form of an impact. How do I dress? It sounds really bit simple, but how do I dress to impress? How do I dress appropriately to the environment I am in? But then it's the other aspect also of impact on others, right? How do I lead others? How do I make sure that I'm creating an environment where others can really flourish, where they feel empowered, where they or the others can really make their impact and deliver the value and be successful. And then last but not least, and that's kind of for me, the third layer is delivering something of value to other people. So that's really those three different types of layers for me in a nutshell.
Okay, so what are the challenges that newly elevated senior executives face when it comes to delivering impact?
Well, one of the things is where to start. it's the biggest question really people have when they get newly promoted is the question, where do I start? What kind of information do I have at my disposal? And if it's a lot of information, which usually is the case, which information to trust to then make a decision? And the other thing is, when you're newly promoted in a relatively senior role, there's obviously a lot of pressure you feel others put on your shoulders, as well as the pressure you put on your own shoulders, because you want to do well. You want to make sure that you're making an impact very, very, very quickly, that you're delivering the value, that you have the right tools and the right people at your disposal, which leads to a risk of making decisions very, very quickly and prematurely, and not really relying on or trusting your own gut. And that in itself can create a really stressful situations for the people who just been in the job. And navigating that can be very tricky, and it usually takes time. But if we don't grant ourselves the time when we're in that new position, and we cave to the pressures and we're not trusting ourselves, that then in itself can lead to a lot of self-doubt and making the wrong decisions, which ultimately leads to performance issues or creating a detrimental environment for oneself as well as for others.
Okay, so let's go a little deeper.
Yeah.
What's really at stake? I mean, when we're talking about creating impact or not creating impact, what's the bottom line if you don't make the cut?
If you don't make a cut, you're not successful, and there's a lot of self-doubt. And particular, if there's a leader, for example, who's not delivering or is not creating an environment where others feel empowered, where others feel motivated, obviously that creates a detrimental work environment. So people start to feel frustrated. They might not trust the leader. They are demotivated. And as soon as demotivation starts, usually productivity takes a toll. And people may leave because they don't trust the leader. So there's an entire downward spiral, and the impact the impact it has on different individuals, the leader themselves, the teams, the entire organization can go quite deep. So there's a lot of stake, there is a lot at stake.
Would you give us a few tips that we can use today to help us generate more impact?
Yeah, so one of the major things I find is creating your own self-awareness or increasing your own self-awareness, right? We all work in our own little bubble, and sometimes we forget how we come across, how we communicate, how we interact with others, simply because we're so consumed with the day-to-day activities, with the different types of challenges. So starting to invite any kind of feedback, any kind of advice, to that will really help, and then that will kick off a journey on your own professional as well as personal development and your growth. So really inviting that feedback to have, and increasing your own awareness and your own self-awareness, to then start to develop on your own growth mindset that will ultimately, well, set you up on a journey. Does
What
that
kind
answer
of
your
time?
question?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're right there. But what kind of time frame are we looking at? I mean, a lot of people, if they don't see results and, overnight, they're looking at their watch. They're saying, okay, I did this an hour ago. I want to see something. But I mean, what's realistic? What kind of time frame are we looking at?
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, coaching in itself, it's not a magic wand, right? I wish it would be, but it's not. So it does take some time, and it does take some effort. So if somebody is just coming to me and says, listen, I want to change overnight, I want to be the best leader with making the most impact I can possibly do, and I want to do it by tomorrow. um I'm afraid that's not really a realistic expectation, and that's not really possible, because it takes work and it takes time. I mean, it's like picking up any other skill, right? You don't pick up a skill overnight. And I keep telling people, even when you're a baby, you didn't learn to walk overnight. It took you a year and a half on average. That's what babies take, a year and a half in order to learn how to walk. When you learn how to ride a bicycle, that took you many more approaches. When you studied for, in business, how fast did you learn accounting? All those things take time, and that's the kind of conversation I will have with my clients. And so it can vary. It varies how much effort and work my client will put into their work and into their own personal and professional development. And then also it depends where they are at in their journey and what their goal is. So I can have clients which come for me for a very specific thing, where they say, for example, oh, I've got this very important meeting coming on where I need to present a certain business case. I'm not quite sure how to do it, how to deliver that in an impactful way, etc. So that's a very specific thing they come to me for, and they need help for. So the engagement that person I will have will be relatively short, right? We can have 2-3 sessions, and that might be it. If somebody else says, oh, hang on a minute, I'm not quite sure why I've been overlooked a second time for promotion. I've done, my performance reviews year on, every year has been very, very good, but yet still I'm not making the cut for the next level, and I want to work on that. That's an entire different engagement, and therefore will take quite a bit longer because we would need to dig in. What's the pattern here? What's the reason that person is going to be overlooked? What are certain habits and beliefs and values of that individual who wants to increase? And then in order to really map out the journey where they're at. So we're going to be looking at all different types of things in what makes that individual that particular person and how can they improve by staying authentic at the same time and staying true to themselves, still having and not changing their values or their entire belief system just to fit into a certain box, but being more successful in relation to what success means to them. So that I'm
Okay,
afraid there's no straight answer to your question.
that was a great answer. I followed that completely. But let's shift gears a little bit.
Sure.
Inga, would you tell us a bit about Medea International?
And how that came apart. Yeah, so when I stepped out of my own and said, well, I want to do more executive coaching and I want to do more of strategic advisory when it comes to bigger sales opportunities. I was wondering, how do I name my company? And I'm a big fan of the Greek mythology, and so I looked at different types of figures in the Greek mythology, and Medea sprang to mind. So, for the people who don't know the story, Medea is a enchantress in the Greek mythology who helped her husband obtain the golden fleece, and the golden fleece is kind of a symbol of kingmanship and success. So she is one who operates in the background, gives advice, guides her husband, makes him feel better about himself, more confident to really embrace the entire thing of a successful leader at his time. And that's the kind of person I am. I don't really seek out the spotlight myself, but I love doing it for others. So I love helping others being successful, put them in the spotlight and provide them with as many tools and guidance and as I can. So it's me working in the background and making others successful. And I take such a joy from it when I see others developing in that. So that's how the name creation of Medea International came about. Forget the gruesome ending. The story of Medea in itself has a really gruesome ending. And that's certainly not what I have in common with her. It is really operating in the background, making others shine, basically.
So when I think of it, I think of Medea and I think of her gifts. She had the gift of prophecy and she gave great advice and she helped Jason obtain the golden fleece.
Yeah.
Now, I think, is that you in some ways? I mean, do you help your clients? I mean, using strategy and business development, obviously. Do you help them? Is that how you help them create impact?
Yes. Yeah. So it's me working with those individuals and helping them to discover their uniqueness. It sounds a bit new agey, I know, but at the end of the day, any coach for me is a tool where, I just had a conversation with somebody where I spoke about how does coaching actually help, and I compared it to a sports coach, or in this case with Medea. We're there to give somebody the advice when somebody is stuck and they're not really seeing the tree for the forest anymore. If they find a way out, you need somebody who gives you a little bit, kind of shows you the light at the end of the tunnel, who gives you a little bit of advice, gives you some guidance, gives you some feedback on the things you've done well, but is also giving you some challenge. If we only have yes sayers around us, that's not helping us in our personal or professional development. So the magic really lies in holding a mirror in front of somebody, but always with the best interest at heart. So when I work, and that's one of the things, because you said, how am I? How do I compare myself with Medea? Because she was that magical figure and the one who gave guidance. Yes, I do. I do give guidance if it's asked for, but predominantly I help my clients find out more about what they are capable of and really dig that out. And that is done through a lot of conversation, in inviting them to reflect on their own actions, inviting them to look at different angles, discover certain patterns. And because I'm sitting outside, I'm not them. I might see different patterns emerging than what they would see. And it's my responsibility to invite them to look at those things. And that's where I see some of the similarities. And that ultimately, that entire invitation of who are you and who are you in what context, and how does that person react in different types of environments and the reasons why, and understanding that better, that ultimately helps them to develop different types of skills or enhance the ones which are already there.
Perfect. So, what is the Association for Proposal Management Professional Certification? And how do you use it in your executive coaching program?
That's a really good question, because that one goes back for quite some time, many years now. It's basically an organization for people working in the field of bid management, sales, bigger sales negotiations, leading multi-million-dollar projects they like to sell to another. What they teach you is a more strategic way of developing business and selling and presenting yourself. So there's a lot of process, strategy, and methodology in there, which also relates to looking at different types of centers of influence. So if I take it back to a sales opportunity, when there's let's say a multi-million-dollar sales opportunity and various countries and cultures are involved on the client side as well as on my own organization, I then, as the person leading that initiative, really have to figure out, okay, so how do I manage all this? I've got all those different types of centers of influence who all want to have a word, who all have their own interests. How do I manage it and then strategically move that forward and use it and develop those relationships so that I can actually better understand what's driving each of those individuals on centers of influence, what's the political landscape like, and what does that matter to me and my opportunity and my own standing and in my own pursuit of success. If I now take that approach to the coaching, it's a similar thing. So whilst coaching sounds, well, I'm just going to have a conversation, there's actually a lot more to it. There's a thinking behind it as well, because I have to I have to understand where my client is coming from. So, and before any engagement starts, there also has to be a conversation, right? Okay, so where do you want to end up? What would you like to be different? And what's the baseline? Where are we starting out? And helping the client also to understand what are the client centers of influence. What's their environment? What's their environment like? Where do they sit in the grander scheme of things? I'm having that conversation with my client. It helps me to understand them better. But ultimately, I help them to understand where they sit and how they can increase their influence, and how can they be more strategic about it? How can they create a better message? How will they adapt their own messaging depending on the different types of audiences? That type of thinking and process, that really, I crafted that whilst getting my training under the belt from the Association of Proposal Management.
So, do you ever coach multicultural teams?
I have in the past, yes. Not
Okay,
right
so
now.
the reason I bring that up is because I ask this question of everyone. And it occurred to me that what you do is like 3 or 4 times the level of difficulty that most people have to deal with. So the question is, how do you get busy executives to make the small changes necessary to get the ball rolling?
Ooh. How do I get them?
Considering the
It,
cultural issues too.
yeah, so it depends the situation we're in. So if it's an executive and I'm only working with that one person and they come to me, I would ask them what the changes they want to make. I would basically inquire, okay, so what would they want to change or what they would want to be different, right? Because that kicks off a nice conversation. And I would invite them to, so if they're very clear about the change they want to make, I would invite them to look at what are the hidden and maybe even competing commitments they have in order to make that change. So to give you an example, right? Somebody might say, I want to delegate better. And I know that because I'm starting to burn the candles on both ends, and I can't do it any longer. And I know I need to delegate better. And that has been the feedback. The hidden commitment might be that they feel really attached to certain tasks and they have let's say, they might be challenged with giving up control. So that would be a hidden and competing commitment. On one hand, they want to give up and they want to delegate, but for them that means, oh my God, I'm losing control of it. I'm losing sight of this, so I can't. So they're still trying to do it all. So that's a competing commitment, and inviting them to really look at those and where the driver for the change and where the driver for the not changing is really coming from. That is then really powerful to make a sustainable change, and usually relatively quickly.
Okay. Now, Inga, earlier we talked about Medea and what it means to your business. Next, I'd like to talk about Prometheus, another figure from Greek mythology.
Yeah.
Prometheus was the original fire giver. And on this podcast, we talk a lot about fire givers. Tell us about your podcast and what kind of enlightenment you're trying to give to your audience.
Yeah. So I just started out on an entire journey of podcasting, which I find absolutely fascinating. I've released with my podcast, Professionals Unplugged, I released 8 episodes right now. And the podcast is all about work. So we're having conversations about any kind of work issues, the good, the bad, the ugly, and sometimes the funny. And I get together with other professionals. Sometimes it's me one-on-one. Other times I invite three other professionals along to have a conversation. And I think the enlightening is it's on so many levels. I mean, I learn every single time I get on a conversation with somebody, I learn something. I either learn about them, about their different perspectives, or I learn a new fact, which for me, I find very thrilling. Learning for me is certainly something which gives me fire. Is one of my drivers is the learning, when I find new facts, new fascinating things, in particular around people and what makes people tick. That for me is lighting my inner fire. That's my passion. And I think the conversations I have with other people where we mull things over from different perspectives, simply because some of my guests are also from different countries and different cultural backgrounds. So just alone because of that, we have a different outlook on life, and we have a different opinion on certain things, how certain things should be done at work, and what we've experienced at work, and really exchanging and sharing those kind of experiences, I find very enlightening. And as far as I know, my guests as well, because they as well come back and say, wow, this was so interesting. I've learned something which I wasn't aware of, or I just realized that there's a different way of looking at a certain thing. Just because I've done it always this way doesn't necessarily mean it can be can be done in a completely different matter, and it's still okay to do it. There is no wrong way, or there is no right way. And that, as well as the feeling of I'm not alone in this, whatever this is, that alone can be really empowering for people to experience. And I think also hearing other people talk about really difficult things, how what made things that trip them up, and then knowing, wow, it also happened to the really successful ones. I think that can be really powerful, in particular for the people who are just starting out in their career, by seeing, just because people are at the top, it doesn't mean that it was an easy journey for them. It doesn't happen overnight. And it's okay to fail, because guess what? Failing is learning. It's part of life, and it's okay. You don't get crucified. You get up and you learn from it, and you do it better next time. That message, I find sometimes is missing in our world and in our culture, in particular when we're talking about, oh yeah, we all need to be so successful. We forget the part, or we forget the journey to success, and that journey, is paved with failures. Although I don't really like the word failures, bumps in the road with learnings, because failure is learning.
Okay, so now we've reached that time in the podcast where we have our public service announcement.
Yeah.
Were you taught entrepreneurship as a child?
Probably not officially. I don't think my parents or school set out and said, "Well, we're going to teach you in entrepreneurship." I think I was very lucky. My parents were always very adamant that I was raised very self-efficient. I was raised very independent, independently thinking. My parents encouraged critical thinking and encouraged curiosity, and also financial literacy, which, all of those things are kind of at the basis of entrepreneurship. Um, well, yeah, so maybe I was taught, even though it wasn't labeled that way.
What advice would you give young and youth entrepreneurs who want to pursue a career like yours or similar to yours?
Um, well, people start when people are starting out in their career, or when they're in college, right? When you're young, that's really the time to try out different things. Simply because it doesn't have that much, or that doesn't have that many consequences. In speech marks, right? When you're older and you change career, and you have a family to support, all different types of aspects and considerations are taking place, right? Am I still able to support my family? How much money do I bring in? All those kind of questions. There are more of those kind of questions when you're older than when you're younger. So when you're younger, that's the time when when you can experiment what you really like, and be open to making changes relatively quickly, because the consequences are not as high, or they're not as many there. So my best advice is find out what you're good at, what you love doing, and what you get paid for, and where's that sweet spot in between. And don't be afraid to try out something new. If you discover something about us, like, oh well, yeah, that's not really, I had a little bit of an idealistic approach to it, and reality is something I am not happy with, make a change. So that's really the best advice I can give, and talk to as many people as possible, get input.
As we start to wrap up, Inga, is there anything you wish more people would ask you?
Oh, that's a really good question. I wish more people would ask me. Besides the fact, how can I hire you? It's the um, I'm drawing a blank here. What's the question I would like to be asked more?
Okay, no problem. Let's come at it from a different standpoint. You're at a dinner party and someone says, "So you tell me you're an executive coach. Well, show me. What is that one thing you could do that would let that person know that you are who you say you are?"
I would invite them to have a conversation about a thing they're currently struggling with.
That'll work. So, do you have anything? Do you have anything on the horizon, something new that you're willing to share with us?
Not really on the horizon, but it's it's the podcast, to be fair, because it's so new. I've only have 8 episodes out. I don't have many followers, and I am always looking for people to come and talk to me about their experiences at work and their opinions and views on how we can make the workplace a better one for all of us to be more successful and feel more at home and encouraged and empowered at.
So, what's the best way to follow you on social media?
So I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on Instagram, and that's it.
Inga, thank you for joining us on the Subscription Maker podcast.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. It was fantastic talking to you, Zachary.
Before we wrap up, too many people work way too hard and earn too little from their online businesses. You don't have to be one of them. And that's a wrap.